So this is Christmas.
I love the Polar Express. I've always loved the Polar Express. I watch it every year on Christmas Eve with my siblings, making gingerbread or chocolate houses and eating Christmas snacks. I even made a video about the Polar Express last year to clarify that my opinion on the film is correct and everybody who disagrees is wrong. But this year, I have a confession to make. I was wrong about the Polar Express, and Josh Hutcherson agrees. Not the movie, to be clear. I will stand by my opinions on that until the day I die. I am, of course, talking about the video game adaptation for the GameCube, PlayStation 2, and PC. There's also a Game Boy Advance version, but for safety reasons I would not be talking about that. This is a game that one reviewer described as encompassing the stealth skills of Metal Gear Solid, the athleticism of any EA Sports favorite, the action of a game like Red Dead Revolver, and a wonderful story like Grand Theft Auto. But while I will always support the animated film while I still draw breath, my thoughts on the video game adaptation are a little different. Here's why I was wrong about the Polar Express, the video game. The game's opening cutscene is pretty similar to the movie. That is, it is literally several scenes from the movie chopped up into about a minute or so. And that makes sense. You're playing a game, not watching the film, so you probably want to get to gameplay a little quicker, even though the clips just make me want to watch the film instead. Ultimately though, it's chopped up so much that it ends up missing the heart of the movie. In fact, it seems to bypass the main theme and conflict entirely, the hero boy struggling to believe. It's still mentioned briefly, but more as a reference than an actual conflict. I can understand why this is the case, as they're really telling a different story entirely in order to justify the gameplay sequences, but it kind of just waters down the narrative and loses a big part of the magic. After about a minute or so, or 11 minutes in the film, the kids are excited to see the Herpelsheimer's store, which was a real department store until 1990 in, among other places, Grand Rapids, Michigan, where the original book's author Chris Van Allsburg is from. And this is where the narratives really start to divert. Here, the Ebenezer Scrooge puppet, who only had a brief but memorable appearance in the film, being controlled by the hobo, becomes the main antagonist, stealing the children's tickets so they'll never make it to the North Pole and never believe in Santa Claus. For a video game, I understand the approach, but as far as the narrative goes, it's not hugely inspired. It takes what I consider to be an interesting metaphorical and thematic conflict and turns it into a purely physical one to justify gameplay challenges. It also takes what is an interesting but singular part of the movie, the hero girl's missing ticket, and applies it to several children on the train. But I guess retrieving her ticket is something the hero boy does in the film, so why not make it a bigger part of his character here? On that note, if there's one thing that I think the game's writing gets right, it's the characterization. The heroism and initiative of the hero boy, the heart and self-doubt of the hero girl, the attitude of the know-it-all. Ultimately, it serves as a reminder that these are the same characters, just in a different medium. As someone who's been watching the film for decades, it's nice hearing most of the actors reprise their roles too. It's almost like finding out more information about these otherwise somewhat mysterious characters, like we're getting to see more of them that we didn't see in the film. It's also very funny to read reviews very confidently criticizing the conductor's voice actor for sounding nothing like Tom Hanks, as if they just found a random impersonator to play the role. In reality,
No, it's my brother Jim.
the playable part of the Polar Express opens with possibly one of my favorite parts of the game, inside the Polar Express. Of course, there's very little to do there, besides just watching the NPCs or turning around and collecting coins and a toy part in the back carriage, and the charm wears off fairly quickly, but there is something quite nice about this. It's really like being inside of the world of the movie or book. It's a feeling that I don't think the game ever really recaptures to this extent, and I think it could have benefited from more moments like this, simply existing inside the world, with the freedom to roam around some spaces, however small. Being able to freely roam around the streets of the North Pole, even briefly, would be magical. Of course, it doesn't take long for actual gameplay to start happening, with a different scenario in each train car, dodging enemy toys, opening jack-in-the-boxes to find a lost ticket, and collecting coins along the way. The third one is a little interesting though, in that the same gameplay feature appears twice in quick succession within the same chapter, kicking balls at puppets. And while the connection is admittedly tangential, it does make me think of a previous game from the same developer. No major world events occurred on the 13th of October 1995. Henry Roth, the American novelist, died at the age of 89 in New Mexico. Park Ji-min, later a member of the famous boy band BTS, was born in South Korea. And in Melbourne, Australia, a new company was registered under the name Blue Tongue Multimedia by Andrew Heath and Chris Mosley. As its name suggests, it sought to take advantage of the new opportunities opening up for multimedia content creation within Australia. They did graphic and web design, corporate web development, software development, and of course, video game development. Within a year, Blue Tongue had released its first game, AFL Finals Fever, released during the centenary season of the AFL. The game was, it seems, pretty successful. According to Blue Tongue, it consisted of over 30,000 individually rendered frames of animation. That I can believe. Even almost 30 years later, there's something incredibly charming about the game's art style and animation. By this time, there were plenty of other sports games. FIFA would soon release its fourth entry, and its art and animation were evidently much more advanced and clearly very successful. But for the first game from a development team in a country not known for its video game development teams, AFL Finals Fever is impressive. 8 years later, of course, though the ball and the sport themselves are very different, a similar gameplay mechanic would return in the Polar Express. And it's one of several different gameplay mechanics, not just throughout the game, but especially in this first chapter. There's a tennis-like game, a brief stealth section, and train cars where you have to catch toy mice, break ice blocks, smash toys with a hammer, and throw food and toys at puppets. These are admittedly simplistic, perhaps overly so as some reviewers pointed out, and there's a point to be made that there are other children's games that are more complex or interesting or creative, and that's valid. But ultimately this kind of does achieve the goal that the developers set out to achieve, to offer plenty of variety but keep the controls simple so that anyone can enjoy the game, especially the target audience of 6 to 10-year-olds. Another thing that the developers sought was to do right by the book and the film, and I think one section where they successfully made gameplay out of a film segment is the second chapter. While the hero boy walking atop the train lasts like 45 seconds in the film, it's an extended gameplay sequence in the game, likely to take at least several minutes, possibly longer on your first attempt, especially for younger players. Another interesting gameplay sequence, probably the game's fastest and most exciting, is the downhill skiing part, where the developers have taken some creative liberties. Instead of skiing down the train itself, the hero boy and the hobo take a shortcut by skiing down a hill to catch the train, with the option to collect coins and toy parts on the way. Mind you, it doesn't really make any sense. How is it quicker to ski down the hill than the train itself? Especially since they end up doing that anyway when it cuts back to the movie footage at the end. But I know better than to question the logic behind the Polar Express, whose film adaptation has a train go from a full stop to full acceleration and a sick J-turn in the middle of a cracking ice lake. Why else would I watch this movie every year? Besides, it reminds me of other skiing games or segments, like 1080 snowboarding, complete with the slow, annoying animation of falling over and getting back up again. The Game Boy Advance version has a full skiing sequence atop the train too, which is a little closer to the film, but again, I don't feel comfortable talking about that version right now. Like the film, the game then moves inside the train's engine room, and like the film, it involves the hero boy assisting the fireman and engineer to keep the train moving. Though, unlike the film, that assistance comes in the form of catching a bunch of loose parts that fall out of the engine and throwing them at Smokey and Steamer while dodging pieces of coal. It's not exactly riveting gameplay, but it's surprisingly satisfying when done right. One part of the film that the game doesn't really adapt into gameplay is the scene with the caribou. They're still in the game, courtesy of a cutscene taken directly from the film, but otherwise they're not really part of it, at least in gameplay. Mind you, I'm not entirely sure how they could have been incorporated, but the game has already taken plenty of other creative liberties, so I'm sure more couldn't have hurt. Besides, it wouldn't have been the development studio's first animal-based gameplay anyway. In the mid-1990s, childhood friends Craig and Andrew had an idea. Craig's younger sister did Pony Club, and when it was called off due to poor weather, she came home and had nothing to do. But what if she could come home and do Pony Club as a game instead? Cinemedia, now known as Vic Screen, gave them $110,000 in funding, and the friends partnered with Blue Tongue, who offered the expertise and wisdom. But Blue Tongue, it seems, small as it was at the time, was busy working on other games like Warrior World and Black Ops, neither of which would see the light of day. So, as Andrew recalls, he had a single artist and a single programmer assigned to the game, while he and Craig were producers in charge of distribution and partnerships. The game was developed with advice from veterinarians and those close to the sport, and it was self-published as Riding Star in 1998. And it kind of blew up. It was translated into 8 languages and ultimately sold over 150,000 copies. It was re-released in different countries with different titles, adopting the name of local equestrians. Around this time, Craig and Andrew went on to found IR Gurus, a development studio. And while Blue Tongue didn't make more AFL games after Finals Fever, IR Gurus did, with yearly releases for the PS2 from 2002 to 2007, plus several other sports games and a few more equestrian games. Writing style wasn't widely reviewed by media outlets, but those who did generally enjoyed it, calling it gentle and fun, though one reviewer was notably unhappy, writing, "I pity the fool that spent a good chunk of his paycheck on this." Based on some of the reviews, it seems gameplay could be occasionally challenging, with a bit of a learning curve. Challenging enough to make Blue Tongue more strongly consider its younger audience when developing the Polar Express though? Hard to say. One gameplay sequence that feels a little child-oriented in the Polar Express is the next one with Smokey and Steamer. Basically a dance minigame. It's silly but harmless, about what you might come to expect from the game at this point. Though I do question what they're actually doing. They're just shoveling the air and somehow that makes the train operate? Do these men really need a child to repeat their silly little actions to feel motivated enough to run this train? Sorry, I should probably stop asking questions about how this vehicle works. The next chapter has a few repeated gameplay sequences from earlier, throwing toys at puppets and catching toy mice to get keys. One of my favourite gameplay sections is moving boxes to clear a path. It's surprisingly satisfying to do, and the hero girl's squeals of joy are very fun. After that, the game makes one of its boldest and most avant-garde narrative decisions. A boss fight against the main antagonist halfway through the story. Maybe the real antagonist, as some reviews might put it, is boredom. To be clear, I wouldn't put it that way, but some reviewers did use such words. Like Ryan for Cube magazine, who dubbed it the Boredom Express and suggested that the hero boy doesn't believe in Santa because he's received the Polar Express for Christmas. Mind you, this is the same reviewer who also wants a device that lets players reach into their TV to punch a child in the face, so perhaps wise to take this opinion with a grain of salt. I think the Scrooge fight itself is fun, if a little simple. As I said before, I think it's especially interesting that they took what is ultimately a fairly brief part of the film, not part of the book at all, and made it a fairly big part of the game. That's really the nature of adaptations like this though, where the conflict in the original material doesn't quite naturally suit the traditional hero-villain setup of a video game. The developers are certainly no strangers to video game adaptations though. In 1959, Robert Heinlein's science fiction story Starship Soldier was published as a two-part magazine serial, and soon thereafter as a full book under the name Starship Troopers. Almost 40 years later, in 1997, Paul Verhoeven's film adaptation was released. Around the turn of the millennium, Hasbro contracted the roughly 20-person team at Blue Tongue Software, which had recently split and rebranded its e-commerce and website solution division, to make a video game adaptation. Instead of going for the perhaps traditional action-adventure, platformer or puzzle route though, as they would later do with the Polar Express, Blue Tongue made a real-time tactics game, choosing a genre that best matched the IP. And as it turns out, this was not a bad decision. The game is good, and critics generally agreed. Just don't read too closely into IGN's review, which said there isn't any particular reason I'd recommend Starship Troopers, yet still called it good and gave it 7.2 out of 10. Sometime later, Universal was looking for a company to develop a Jurassic Park video game, and impressed with their demo and vision and their technical wizardry on Starship Troopers, they picked Blue Tongue for the $2.5 million deal over 5 other major international game companies. Once again, Blue Tongue, the 35-person team soon to be named Blue Tongue Entertainment, picked a genre that best fit the IP, theme park simulation. I mean, it's in the name after all. And once again, this seemed to be the right call. Blue Tongue's first multi-platform game got its strongest reviews to date, won several awards, and sold over 400,000 copies in about a year. Game Informer called it one of the best console business sims I've ever played, and it was even mentioned by a standing committee as part of a long history of successful computer games developed in Victoria. With these two games, Blue Tongue was tasked with creating video game adaptations of different IP, and both times chose genres that best seemed to fit their style, rather than, say, blindly picking whatever genre seemed to be the most successful at the time. It's why I think for the Polar Express, they picked a genre that allowed for a variety of gameplay styles. One could argue that each style could have been better developed, but whatever. It's not strictly a puzzle platformer or a train simulator or a dance game, because they probably felt they wouldn't be very entertaining for an extended period of time. So instead, they can pick and choose multiple styles to try and make those entertaining for their allotted time, including apparently a dance minigame. Again, I will defend the film's hot chocolate sequence until my dying breath, but I won't do the same for the in-game sequence. It's not really that bad to be honest, but it's a shame the song itself couldn't have been included. I think you end up focusing on the movement and control so much that the actual events of the scene pass by without thought. It's cool that they achieve the same awkward dying look on the waiters' faces though. You could knock on top of that head and only hear a vacant echo. There's nothing behind those eyes. The arrival at the North Pole misses a lot of the film's charm in my opinion. Seeing the buildings and their factory-like nature is where a lot of the magic comes from, and it's one of my favourite parts of the film, but it likely would have ended up being literally just shots from the movie anyway, so I can just go and watch it again instead. As I said before, it would have been enjoyable to explore the North Pole more freely here too, but the downhill rails section is a decent enough alternative I suppose. That jump over the hill is more insane than anything that happens in the movie though. There's no way they should have survived that, let alone been able to control the train car immediately afterwards, not to mention the multiple head-on collisions that I caused them to have. What's up with the North Pole's infrastructure too? Why are there so many potholes everywhere, especially directly beneath the train tracks? Where are the warnings for the vehicles crossing the tracks in front of an oncoming train? Did they not have inspectors here? Do the elves have to dodge the potholes every time they ride this train? Did they really have to go over those massive jumps anytime they want to go down the hill? How do they get back up? Were the city's builders smoking on the job? What is going on here? The gameplay itself is fine, and it's still nice to see more of the North Pole, even if it is fairly repetitive. Possibly the worst part is the fact that the gameplay that follows is somewhat similar. The pneumatic tube is basically just on-rails gameplay again, but instead of avoiding obstacles, now you have to hit specific targets. Again, it's fine, short enough to be inoffensive, but it's a bit repetitive with sometimes awkward controls. Probably the best part of it, as is possibly true with most parts of the game, is the music. So, I spoke to the man who wrote it.
At the age of 10, I went and saw Star Wars, and it literally changed my life.
It was here that Stefan Schutz fell in love with the idea of being involved with sound and music.
My oldest brother basically bought me the double record vinyl album.
When he grew up, he wanted to be John Williams. How fitting then that he would be hired at Blue Tongue around the turn of the century, and about a year later, tasked with writing the music for a Jurassic Park game. It's not a Star Wars game, sure, but Jurassic Park has its own impact on Stefan.
The scene where you first seen a dinosaur, I can't watch that scene without it bringing tears to my eyes because it's so beautiful. The music is one of the best pieces of music he's ever written, especially that theme. My wife, she's literally the most amazing person in the world. She said, so you always wanted to work on Star Wars, but you got to work on the score for the film that has the John Williams music that affects you the most. And it's like, dude, you did Jurassic Park, and as an IP, it's mind-blowing. And as an area where you can write music, it's mind-blowing.
Universal liked the music he wrote, similar to John Williams but not plagiaristic, but they didn't like the samples.
And I'm like, yep, well aware of that. I can try and find some better samples. And the Universal publishers went, no, you misunderstand. We don't want you to use samples, we want you to use a real orchestra.
So for his second ever project, Stefan, who had never had a single composition class, wrote a score for the 70-piece Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, said to be the first fully orchestral video game score in Australia.
So here I am, sort of, a year and a half into working in the industry, and I've been told, go off and write music for Melbourne Symphony. At which point I just went into a blind panic. Sometime
later, when the Polar Express came around, he did it again. That is, after the developers realised how much the film's composer, Alan Silvestri, would cost.
The CEO of the studio came up to me and went, we just got a quote for how much Alan Silvestri is going to charge to do the game music. I'm like, oh yeah? And like, we thought that because he was doing the film, he could just do the game as well, sort of in the same thing. And I kind of went, oh yeah? And they're like, can you do the music for the game? I'm like, yes, I can.
Interestingly enough, this isn't too dissimilar to what happened with the sound effects, which were also meant to be sourced from the film's sound design team. That is, until the Warner Brothers producer who liaised between the two teams made communication unnecessarily difficult. So Stefan decided to do it all instead.
And it was good because it basically meant, great, and now I've got an excuse to go out and spend a day recording steam engines. I recorded the sounds for skiing. I went up to the snow and recorded sounds for skiing. I recorded the steam trains, throwing tennis balls and things at a wall for all the bouncy balls and the various different things like that.
So from the music to the sound design, Stefan created all of the game's audio himself. But while Jurassic Park had 3 film scores to take inspiration from, the Polar Express at this time had nothing.
It was actually the first time I was making a completely unique score. They had been using some Danny Elfman music as temp tracks in some of the cinematics, and I looked at it when, Nightmare Before Christmas was sort of used in a few places, but that didn't really gel for me. So literally the Polar Express game score was me making up the music as I went along.
There was one other film score that he borrowed from, though.
Basically, the entire piece for the Zeppelin is fairly blatantly inspired by Pirates of the Caribbean, which once you hear that, you kind of can't unhear it, because I'm...
According to the game's publisher, the filmmakers were impressed with the score, and as far as I'm concerned, they were right to have been. It's actually great. It's got a lot of depth, not just emotionally, but compositionally, which is unsurprising considering Stefan's successful career as a talented sound designer. There are different character themes that sit apart then blend together as the characters do, and it's layered in a way to make me appreciate it more each time. It sounds like something out of a Christmas movie, but with enough awareness to settle into the background of the interactive experience of a game. It's already in my Christmas playlist too. Thankfully, as of last year, it's finally on streaming services, alongside some of Stefan's other works. It was nice to see Blue Tongue co-founder and COO Andrew Heath put the soundtrack atop his voting card for ABC Classics Music for the Screen poll in 2022, though sadly it didn't make the final list.
It was nice that Andrew put that on. He would have been the only person that probably voted for it, but, it's still kind of cute. Andrew was a good choice for me to be dealing with there, because he cared. He cared about the audio for that point. I think he was quite proud to be involved with the orchestra, stuff like that.
3 choir songs were also made for the game, performed by 20 grade 4 to 6 students from the children's choir of Eltham East Primary School, of which Andrew had been a member and whom he had sing at his wedding. And they're also a very sweet addition, charming renditions of classic Christmas songs. The game's last chapter is divided into several gameplay segments, and it honestly might be my favourite sequence of the game. It starts with some puzzle platforming elements, which is perhaps the most Christmassy part of the game, due in large part, I'm sure, to the fact that there are presents all around. I'm glad it's doing something that I really wanted too, exploring more of the North Pole. Sure, it's just the conveyor belts inside the factory rather than the beautiful buildings outside as depicted in the book and film, so it's not exactly what I was seeking, but I'll take it. It's that same kind of magic that I've always gotten from the film, as if I'm seeing the inner workings of Santa's home and factory. The gameplay is pretty fun too, as simplistic as it is. It's fun to change the levers to reveal new paths, and the speed at which the conveyor belts move makes the gameplay smooth and enjoyable. Don't ask me how we can survive a drop this big though, these kids truly are invincible. In some ways, I wonder if this level was possibly a look at what was to come from the developers. The year after the Polar Express, Blue Tongue, now fully under the ownership of the game's publisher, THQ, released a game called Nicktoons Unite, in which the player controls SpongeBob SquarePants, Jimmy Neutron, Danny Phantom, and Timmy Turner as they meet each other and work together to stop each of their villains. Avengers eat your heart out. It's obviously not identical. For starters, in the Polar Express, you don't actually attack enemies in this way at all, besides throwing some food or toys at puppets. Nor is it unique or anything, it's exactly what you'd expect from a game like this at a time like this. But from the camera angle to the gameplay style, it just gives me a similar vibe. I can absolutely picture many people today having grown up with this game, and having fond memories of it too, which I love.
One of our artists, the game was there, and so he loaded up the SpongeBob level and he handed the controller to his daughter, right? This 3-year-old walks up, pokes Patrick. Patrick laughs, and she laughs. And she's like, "This is the best thing in the world." Pokes Patrick. Patrick laughs, she laughs. Pokes Patrick. Patrick laughs, she laughs. She does this for 20 minutes. This is the best fun she's had all day, is poking Patrick and seeing Patrick laugh. So we've built this giant game with many, many levels and realms and everything like that. And this 3-year-old doesn't get beyond the first screen because she's just poking Patrick and making Patrick laugh.
Blue Tongue followed up with 2 more Nicktoons games too. Battle for Volcano Island in 2006, dropping Jimmy Neutron as a playable character, and Attack of the Toybots in 2007, which brought back Jimmy and a whole host of other characters. While the conveyor belt gameplay reminds me of a puzzle platformer though, the following section is more of a side-scrolling platformer. I'm reminded of Crash Bandicoot quite a bit, but scaling a huge pile of presents instead. Like very huge. What have they even wrapped in these, and why are there so many of them? No wonder the know-it-all kid was upset that his present was just a bunch of underwear. Interestingly, this side-scrolling platformer gameplay reminds me of another game that was to come from the developers in 2007, the PlayStation 2 version of LT Grey, The Adventures of Manny Rivera, based on the Nickelodeon series of the same name, which visually reminded me a lot of The Book of Life. Makes sense, as it turns out it was co-created by the film's director. According to one of the developers, the game, originally meant to be a 12-month project, was made in only a few months, as its budget and subsequently scope were reduced after Nickelodeon cancelled the series in its first season. I wonder if that speaks to this choice of gameplay style. Another game that it reminds me of is the Game Boy Advance version of the Polar Express, but again, I don't want to talk about it. Actually, no, okay, let's talk about why I don't want to talk about it. I'm a big fan of the Polar Express. I think I've made that clear, and I'm very happy to continue to do so, but I'm big enough to admit when I've been out-fanned. @PEPS2 #1 fan is, at the very least, the biggest fan of the Polar Express for PS2, and I can say that with confidence. They share posts championing the film, desperately hoping for a remaster of the game, and harshly criticizing anyone who dare speak out against it. I respect it. They've even been contacted by Andrew Heath, who shared his plaque celebrating the launch of the game. But one thing they're not a fan of is the Polar Express for the Game Boy Advance. They've made posts criticizing it, ridiculing another gimmick account with one follower who loves the game. They've even disparaged it in their own bio, making it clear how much it means to them. I respect this account. I respect their love of the game after several years, their commitment to the bit after so long, and their dedication to sharing love for the movie in the same way that I am interested in doing. So out of respect for @PEPS2 #1 fan, and fear for my life, I won't be talking about the Polar Express for the Game Boy Advance today. That's okay, it was developed by a different Australian studio anyway. One thing I will say about the Game Boy Advance version is that it's actually shorter than the PS2 one, a game already considered pretty short by several reviewers and often criticized for it. In total, the game takes roughly 2 hours to play, maybe 2.5, not much longer than the 90-minute film it's based on. Personally, I can understand this and almost appreciate it. It's a game that can be played, say, in the lead up to Christmas, and probably not one that many will be wanting to complete after the holidays. And for a game that was $30 in the US at the time, soon to drop to $20 by February, it's not too offensively short. But I can understand why some might be seeking a longer game, especially around the release of, say, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, which came out only a week earlier and on average takes way more than 10 times as long to complete. Whether they were aware of the criticisms or not, it's not something the developers seem to have been criticized for with their next adaptation of a film at least. Barnyard, the 2006 Nickelodeon movie, has an average Metacritic score of 42 out of 100. Meanwhile, Barnyard, the 2006 video game adaptation by Blue Tongue, has an average score of 65 out of 100. Obviously, they're completely different mediums and the scores are often completely incompatible, but still, that's quite a difference, and a rare one for a game adaptation of a film. And not only were its reviews better, it was also much longer, roughly 9 hours. According to many, the higher review scores were right too. There are plenty of videos talking about how it's much better than it has any right to be, and how it is bizarrely inappropriate given its target audience. In 2008, Blue Tongue got an opportunity to show off its talent once again with its first original video game as a studio. Original in that it's not based on an existing property, that is. The Blob was originally developed as a PC game by 9 university students in the Netherlands, who released it online, where it caught the eye of THQ, who assigned development of the Wii version to Blue Tongue, and they were likely glad they did. The game got fantastic reviews. IGN called it exactly the type of project that you want to see on the Wii, and one of the best third-party efforts to come over to Wii in a long time. And it won several awards and sold more than 700,000 copies within 5 months. It was a good sign and a testament to the talent of these developers and the team who had grown with each of its games. But all good things must come to an end. Like the Polar Express, whose last gameplay sequence involves flying the Zeppelins to get the massive bag of presents to the North Pole Square. In some ways, it's a little underwhelming as an ending to the game. In others, it feels appropriate. Not just appropriately awkward, especially the controls, but somewhat appropriately Christmassy too. Here, just as I wanted, we get a good look at the North Pole. Its icy lakes, snowy paths, tall buildings, Christmas-themed trains, and plenty of ships and hot air balloons for some reason. Don't question it. This isn't the type of game that would have a big boss fight at the end or anything like that. Neither does the film, whose conflict is more emotional and metaphorical than physical. But this definitely feels like an ending cut short. Unlike the film, there's no meeting Santa directly, there's no bell as a gift, there's no ticket punching, and there's no ride home or Christmas morning. We make it to the square, see Santa fly away, and then cut to credits. The game has a very abrupt ending. But then again, so did Blue Tongue. Having spent some years working on Nickelodeon properties, it seemed the studio had moved on to Marvel ones. They developed the Wii version of Marvel Superhero Squad and started working on an Avengers game. They also developed another original game, The Blob 2, now on several consoles, which again received good reviews, though apparently worse sales, and was seemingly set to be followed by a TV adaptation on the Sci-Fi Network. Instead of turning TV shows into games, Blue Tongue was set to have its game turned into a TV show. But only a few months after The Blob 2's February 2011 release, THQ announced it was laying off approximately 200 employees and closing 2 of its Australian studios, including Blue Tongue. Obviously, this isn't unusual in the industry. It was one of dozens of development studios to close in 2011, one of at least half a dozen in Australia alone. But it's a sad reality for an industry that so often deserves so much better. Even games like the Polar Express are worthy of respect and appreciation. But that doesn't mean they can't be criticised. In 2005, Josh Hutcherson, the actor who provided the motion capture performance for the hero boy in the film, was asked to play and rank 3 video game adaptations of films: The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King, Spider-Man 2, and The Polar Express. I think it's safe to say which one he ranked third. It was really repetitive. It needs to be more exciting. Make more variety through the game, change the storyline a little bit, make it a little bit more difficult. This is probably the most honest response about the game from someone who is somewhat connected to this property. The publisher said they had a great response from both Robert Zemeckis and Tom Hanks, and it said that the film's producers listened to the developers' ideas and provided access to footage, models, concept art, and animations. But Josh's reaction also makes sense, since he was A, a child, and B, not actually part of the game at all, outside of the film scenes being reused as short cutscenes. But it's also refreshingly honest because, to many, it's true. The game is perfectly competent, but nothing extraordinary. Perhaps, to critics of the film, that is appropriate. Perhaps it matches whatever opinions they also have of the movie, or perhaps they even like it more than that. As for me though, how was I wrong about the Polar Express? Well, I think the film, and by extension the book, have a certain kind of magic in them, one that feels increasingly difficult to recapture outside of this 90-minute experience each year. And I think, at least to me, any adaptation would have struggled to capture this magic, not least of all one with so many development constraints. But still, considering its developers' efforts, and perhaps most importantly, its primary target audience, I can appreciate this adaptation. At the very least, I certainly don't agree with the harshness of some of the reviews, especially not this one, whose insult doesn't even rhyme, or this award, mostly because it also stealthily insults the film at the same time. You think you can sneak that in there and get away with it? Instead, I think I agree a little more with this accolade. One of 3 hot holiday release picks for 6 to 8-year-olds, alongside the enigmatic Elf the movie for the Game Boy Advance. That is to say, it is not revolutionary, it is likely not a game that adults will especially enjoy playing by themselves for an extended period, and besides the music, it's probably not a game that many will revisit as a Christmas Eve tradition. But it is a perfectly fine game developed in a limited amount of time by a competent and talented group of people who, both before and after, worked on a variety of other great and beloved products, and whose talents, like so many others in its industry, fell victim to its unfortunate need for profits over creativity. And for that, at this time of year, for their efforts and their work on this game and all others, I am grateful. If you are looking for a Christmas Eve tradition though, just do what I do. Get some snacks, make some gingerbread or chocolate houses, and watch your favorite Christmas movie with your best friends in the world.
Well, see ya.